I rented a flat in a converted church. Living in a converted Victorian church sounds atmospheric, but old buildings have a habit of hiding things. For the first 2 months, I blamed myself for the tiny anomalies in my ground floor flat. The kitchen cupboards found standing wide open in the morning, the hallway lights left burning, the house keys shifted 2 inches from where I swore I'd dropped them on the counter. I eventually realized the explanations I'd been giving myself were wrong. The building sat on the isolated edge of Durham, flanked by old graveyards and dense woodland. In the early 2000s, a developer bought the structure, carving the upper sanctuary into luxury apartments and leaving my flat tucked away in the stone extension at the rear. It had its own private entrance facing a gravel car park and a heavy internal timber door that connected me straight to the building's main communal hallway. During the week it was fine, but on weekends the church turned quiet. The other tenants routinely traveled home to Newcastle or York, and the top-floor flats were entirely vacant, stripped bare for ongoing renovations. It was early November when things changed. My university deadlines had finally eased up, so I invited my mates, Lewis and Ben, over on a Friday night to watch football and drink a few beers. By midnight, neither of them was in any fit state to drive. Durham police are everywhere on weekend nights, so they decided to crash on my living room sofa. Because they needed extra bedding, I did something I rarely did. I unlocked the heavy internal timber door, walked out into the dark communal hallway, and fetched spare linens from the landlord's shared storage cupboard upstairs. Normally that internal door stays locked, but that night, carrying a heavy mattress topper and a pile of sheets, I just kicked the door shut behind me, walked into my bedroom, and completely forgot to turn the key. I left the internal door unlocked. I said goodnight around 2 a.m. and closed my bedroom door, letting force of habit turn the lock. I woke up a few hours later. It was 3:17 a.m. The room was dark and the silence was absolute, until I heard floorboards creaking directly on the other side of my bedroom wall. Footsteps, heavy, unhurried, and rhythmic. Someone was walking around out there in the main church hallway. I didn't think much of it at first. Sound carries strangely through old stone architecture, and I figured Lewis or Ben had simply stumbled out of bed to find a glass of water or explore the old building in the dark. I rolled over and waited for the sound to fade. The footsteps stopped. A few seconds later, the heavy metal handle of my bedroom door slowly depressed. It turned entirely until it hit the deadbolt, giving a hard, deliberate rattle. I sat up and stared through the pitch black at the silhouette of the doorknob. No second attempt came. No voice called out. I assumed it was just a drunk friend mistaking my room for the bathroom. I muttered, "Wrong door, mate," into the darkness, listening intensely. I didn't hear anything else, so I eventually went back to sleep. By the time I woke up Saturday morning, Ben had already left early for his work placement. Lewis was still asleep on the sofa. While making coffee, I looked down at Lewis as he started moving around. "Did you or Ben try to get into my room last night?" I asked. Lewis looked genuinely confused. "No, I didn't get up once." "Why?" I told him about the footsteps and the handle. He just laughed, said I was probably hearing things, and asked if we were getting breakfast. Because it was a bright, sunny morning, the paranoia felt stupid. I dropped it. I spent the rest of Saturday out of the house, buried in books at the university library, followed by a single quiet pint at a pub near the river. When I unlocked my side door that evening, The building was dead silent. I checked the tenant notice board by the entrance and noticed a new flyer from the landlord stating that 3 of the flats were completely vacant due to structural drying. Looking up at the building from the gravel lot, every single window was black. I had the entire place to myself. I locked the side door, checked the internal timber door twice, and made sure it was secure. I crawled into bed, watched a show on my laptop for an hour, and finally shut the screen down. The moment the room went dark, I heard it again. Footsteps. This time, they weren't distant. They were right outside my flat, pacing the communal stone hallway, slow, measured, walking from one end of the corridor to the other, then back again. I checked my phone. 1:42 a.m. The pacing didn't stop. For 5 minutes, whoever it was just walked the perimeter of my living space. I just sat there in bed, listening. Eventually, the pacing ceased right outside my internal door. I tried to tell myself that one of the other tenants had returned early, but something about it felt wrong. 10 minutes of total silence passed. Then my bedroom door handle slowly turned. It moved down with care, clicking heavily against the lock. This time, the person on the other side didn't leave. 3 soft, distinct knocks hit the wood. At that point, I knew something wasn't right. I didn't feel safe anymore. I grabbed my phone and fired a text to Lewis. "Are you pranking me? Are you outside my door?" Nothing. I texted Ben. No reply. I typed a message into the building's WhatsApp group chat. "Is anyone in the ground floor hallway right now? Please answer." Total silence. I called the landlord. It went straight to voicemail. The church sat right on the edge of town, surrounded mostly by old graveyards and woodland. If I started shouting, nobody would hear me. I quietly slid out of bed without letting the mattress springs click. Very slowly, I slid my heavy wooden desk across the carpet, wedging it under the door handle. I reached down, grabbed a heavy brass bedside lamp, and stood in the dark gap behind my wardrobe, where I could keep my eyes pinned to the door. I stood there for about 15 minutes. Nothing moved. I dialed 999 and whispered so quietly into the phone that the emergency operator repeatedly had to ask me to speak up. I told her someone was inside my flat, standing right outside my bedroom door. She told me to stay hidden and confirmed that officers were on their way. I stayed behind the wardrobe. Every tiny creak of the old church foundations made me jump. Finally, the dark walls of my bedroom flashed with blue light. The operator whispered that the officers had arrived. Because I didn't feel safe moving across my flat to open the front door, I asked if they could meet me at my bedroom window instead. A few seconds later, a torch beam sliced through the glass, followed by a firm tap. I opened the window, looked out at the officer, and handed him my flat keys through the frame. Moments later, I heard the heavy crunch of boots inside my kitchen. I cleared the desk from the door and stepped out. 2 officers were standing there with torches drawn. My flat was small and open plan, so the search took less than 5 minutes. It was completely empty. The lead officer looked at the internal timber door, the one I'd left unlocked on Friday night. "We need to sweep the main structure," he said. Walking through that dark church with the police was surreal. The ancient sanctuary stretched upward into a freezing blackness. The beams of their torches cut through the dust, illuminating massive stone pillars and empty wooden pews. Our footsteps echoed loudly off the vaulted ceiling. We checked the ground floor vestry. Empty. We climbed the stone spiral stairs to the first floor. Nothing but cold air. Finally, we reached the upper gallery level where the old pipe organ stood. It was a massive historic wooden structure, partially dismantled for the ongoing renovations. The decorative wooden panels that normally housed the inner mechanisms and bellows had been unscrewed, leaving a narrow maintenance chamber exposed. One of the officers shone his torch inside the dark organ housing. He froze. He didn't say a word, but he signaled for his partner to draw his baton. I took one step forward and looked over the officer's shoulder into the beam of the torch. Sitting completely still inside the cramped wooden chamber, surrounded by dust and old metal pipes, was a man. He was curled up into a ball, his knees tucked tightly into his chest. He was filthy. His beard was a matted nest, and his clothes were torn and covered in white plaster dust. He wasn't moving. He was just sitting there in the dark, staring directly out at us through the narrow gap in the woodwork. The look of pure hatred on his face was haunting. The next few minutes were a blur. The officers ordered him out, but he refused to move, forcing them to physically reach into the cramped chamber and drag him out onto the stone floor. He struggled violently, swearing and kicking, until they finally got the handcuffs on him. As they walked him down the narrow stairs past me, he stopped resisting just long enough to lock his eyes onto mine again. The sergeant explained the details to me while we stood out in the gravel car park. The man had been living inside the church for nearly 3 weeks. The construction crew had left a massive run of external scaffolding erected against the back wall, and he had been using it to scale the masonry and slip through an unglazed window frame every single night after the workers went home. Inside the vacant flat upstairs, police uncovered a nest of heavy winter sleeping bags and stolen food wrappers. But it wasn't the squatting that bothered me. The sergeant explained that the man had been navigating the entire church using old maintenance corridors and the disused organ crawl spaces. He had unrestricted access to the communal hallways, meaning he could walk right down to my door whenever the building went quiet. When I told the officer that I'd heard footsteps on Friday night while my friends were sleeping on the couch, he stopped writing in his notebook. He looked at me under the blue lights. "Are you entirely certain this only started on Friday, son?" I didn't answer him, because in that exact second, every single minor anomaly from the previous 2 months flashed through my mind. The open kitchen cupboards, the altered light switches. The keys moved across the counter. I had spent weeks convincing myself I was just losing my mind to university exams. But the truth was much worse. He hadn't just slipped into my flat on Friday night because we left the door unlocked. He had been coming inside for weeks. He had been standing over my bed while I slept. I packed my life into cardboard boxes and broke my lease 3 weeks later. The church has since been completely finished and sold off as luxury real estate. People still ask me if I'd ever live in an old building or a unique conversion again. I always tell them the same thing. Yes, absolutely. But if I do, every single internal door will be double bolted, every single night, without exception.